Oh, stop it. Hello, welcome indeed to Knitter Matters episode 30. Thank you very much for joining us, whether it's live or you're watching the replay later. I really appreciate you being here. I'm Cheryl Lampard of Star Matters International and an image consultant, but through my life, two of my passions have been sewing and knitting. And knitting in particular is the thing that I do every day. I find it incredibly therapeutic and relaxing, and I know many of you do too. Many years ago, I owned a wonderful designer yarn shop in Brighton, England, and one of the great pleasures of owning a yarn shop, apart from being surrounded by all those lovely yarns and colours, was that I got to be able to teach people how to knit. And it's my pleasure now to be able to teach you to knit, albeit via a different platform. So I'm going to ask the camera to turn to the table and we'll get going. Today we're going to talk about ribbing techniques. I'm going to take my glasses off. I can cope better without them. So we're going to talk about ribbing techniques. When it comes to ribbing, we touched on the basics of ribbing techniques. I called this episode a dig in the ribs because I wanted to actually delve a bit deeper into the ribbing techniques, because we tend to think that it's only knit one, purl one, or knit two, purl two, but there are other variations. And very early on we touched on how to do rib, because it's one of those techniques that once you've mastered knit and purl, you need to be able to put them together, because at some point in your knitting projects you're probably going to want to know how to do ribbing. But why do you need to know how to do ribbing? When do you use it? Well, you really want to use your ribbing when you want areas of elasticity. So something that needs to stretch. This is knit one, purl one rib, and this is just done in the round. Okay. So on a hat band, you would typically see something like this. If this were a headband, you want areas where you have stretch and spring without reducing the size. So that's actually quite important, because you don't necessarily want to reduce the size of the garment. You just want to narrow it down. So say it's at a waist point on a sweater or a garment, anywhere that you need to pull it in but still have the size, the original size. So these two versions, knit one, purl one rib, this is a knit two, purl two rib. But you don't only have to use them on the cuffs of a garment or the hemline of a garment. You can use them very effectively, as in this pattern here by Bergère de France, where they've used it very effectively on this lovely sweater vest. They've used a cable and rib technique to pull in the waistline. And the stitches of this garment, the size hasn't changed. It's just this technique has pulled this in. And for the wearer, that would also be really snug around the waist. So it would be a lovely fit. So you can be creative and use different ribbing techniques in combination with other stitch patterns. And cables themselves have a pulling in effect. If you've ever knitted a sweater or changed it up and thought, oh, I'll put a cable in there, you'll know that the cabling actually pulls that in quite a bit. Another reason that you have to swatch. So I'm going to look at we're going to look today at some different rib techniques, and I'm going to show you how to do some of them. I don't need to show you how to do the basic knit one, purl one. You already know that. That's this one. Obviously a bigger yarn, thicker yarn. But this is also knit one, purl one. But what I've done here on this sample, this is a sort of half twisted rib. And what I've done there is I've actually twisted all the knit stitches on both sides. So every time I've come to a knit stitch, I've twisted it. And I'm going to show you how to do that. So it looks very similar on both sides. So this would be a good one if you want to put this maybe on a cuff, where if you're going to flip it back, it's reversible and it looks the same both ways. Okay. So if you were to flip that back, it's going to be the same stitch pattern both sides. There's also one here which I particularly like. This gives a really nice kind of ridged effect. This is the same principle, but what I've done there, I've twisted both knit and purl stitches on both rows. I really like this kind of ridginess. It really you know, it brings out a very simple stitch pattern. And again, it's reversible on both sides. So that's a nice one. I know my grandmother used to use this a lot, and I always used to like her ribbing. You've got to check how stretchy you want it to be. You know, certain stitch patterns, they've got a bit of give, but they're not necessarily stretchy. That's more stretchy than this one. So you do want to swatch and test those. Another one I'm going to show you. This is really nice. This is a mock cable. You see that it looks like a cable. It kind of is a cable, but you don't need a cable needle for it. That gives you some stretch too. And you could do this. I will show you how to do this. But you could do this maybe every other band. So you could do just your knit 2, purl 2, mock cable, knit 2, purl 2, mock cable. You can also change up the spacing. I've done it simply as knit 2, purl 2, knit 2, purl 2. But this also looks really good if you do the knit 2, purl 3, knit 2, purl 3. So you can change the spacing up quite a bit. Again, try it out. If you're going to substitute from what the pattern tells you, you need to try that out. And then finally what I'm going to show you is this. This is a 2-color rib. It's also called a corrugated rib. It's a 2-color rib. It's not very stretchy. It's very effective, but it's not very stretchy. So, you know, that wouldn't necessarily be so good if you want that to really pull in. But I would use this maybe on the bottom of a sweater. So, for example, I really like cuffs on my sweaters and cardigans to pull in, but I don't necessarily want the hemline to pull in, especially if it's a long line garment. I don't want it to pull in perhaps around my hips. That's not my favorite part. So I would want that to be a more relaxed kind of rib. So this one would be perfect for that. It's also very striking. So you could use colors in the sweater, or literally it could be a plain garment and then you choose to do the rib on this, but you need to see how it's going to work. If you want it to be spring back and be stretchy, this isn't the one for you. It's very nice and thick because you've got double the stranding. So it adds a bit of weight to your garment at the hemline too, if that's where you chose to do it. And I will show you how to do that one. So let me show you first how to do the simplest one, which is a different type of rib. So I'm going to show you, you don't need to know how to do the knit 1, purl 1, well, you already know that. So what I'm going to do is to twist it, I'm literally just going to knit into the back of all my knit stitches. So I'm going to knit. And I know we've knitted in the back of stitches before. The purl is the same on this one. I'm going to knit into the back. The purl is the same. Knit into the back. Purl is the same. So I'm literally knitting into the back of that stitch. And when you do that, it twists it. If ever you've looked at your knitting sometimes and thought, oh, okay, I've got a twisted stitch there. That's because it's been placed on the needle in a way to twist it. And we're doing that deliberately now. Sometimes you don't want to do that. And to untwist a stitch, if it's the wrong way, you'd knit into the back of it. But we're twisting this deliberately. Now, there is a version of this that you can just do a normal knit and purl on the second row. But I sort of just do this on all my knit stitches because I just like how reversible it is. So purl row now. Again, knit, twist my knit stitch. I'm keeping my purls the same for this particular one. You could try it and see if you like it just with knitting and purling on the row back, just a standard knit and purl without twisting. See if you like it. It's up to you. See if it's stretchy enough. That's important. If you need the stretch, the elasticity, if that's what you're using the rib for, then you don't want to lose that. So you do need to understand how it's going to affect the garment or the piece of knitting that you're doing. And into the back of the stitch. And so on. Excuse me. Now I'm going to show you. So that's where you knit just into the back of each knit stitch on both sides. Now I'm going to show you this one where I knit into the back and purl into the back of every stitch. So knit into the back of the stitch, bring the yarn forward, and I'm purling into the back of my purl stitch. Knit, that's knitting into the back is always easier, I think, than. So if this is troublesome for you, kind of pull out that a little bit, or, you know, get your needle in. You don't want to stretch this out, but if it's tight on the needle, you know, you can always pull it back a bit with your finger and see where it's going. That's what you're trying to do. You're twisting the stitch. You're twisting the stitch, and you get a really nice ridgy effect. The less it stretches, the more it's a more relaxed, what I'd call a relaxed rib. It still has some of those qualities, but it's not going to pull in quite as much. So purling into the back of my stitch. Oops. Knitting into the back of my stitch. And sometimes I just pull this out so I can get my needle in more easily. You don't want to stretch it out, but you're just easing the stitch so you can get your needle in there, into the back stitch. And you do the same on the row back, which I'm going to show you. So I'm going to purl into the back of my stitch, knit into the back of my stitch, purl into the back. And that's what you would do for each row. I'll just finish this off so you can see what it looks like as I'm knitting it. There we go. You'll get into a rhythm for this once you start doing it. The trick is just to remember to do it. Sometimes you do it right, oh, I forgot to twist it. It's not the end of the world. You can go back, or you can drop the stitch if you need to. But you can see that's twisted. Twist the whole stitch. You can actually start to see the difference there, those two rows. This is kind of fatter. And then a knit stitch is always wider anyway than it is tall. Oh, Helena, thank you for joining us. How nice to see you on. One of my image consultant buddies there. Thank you. So you can see here this is tighter and kind of crisper. So this is the sort of half twist. This is the full twist with both purl and knit stitches twisted on both rows. Anyway, try them out, see what you like. Now let's have a look at our mock cable. I think this is a really fun one to do. Really, really simple. You don't need a cable needle, which is great. I've done a few rows here just so that you can see. Excuse me. And I've kept again to, on the back, you can see, it's knit 2, purl 2. That's all I've done. As I said, you could make the spacing wider. You can do that. As long as your cable parts, as long as the cable stitches are 2 stitches. But you can spread out the purl stitches if you want, which on the back look knit, of course. So, but I just kept it simple. So I've got to the point where I want to do this twist, really. So what I'm going to do is I knit 2 together. Don't take them off the needle. Then I go into that first stitch, knit that, and pull them both off the needle. Then I purl 2. As if I'm about to knit 2 together. I don't take them off the stitch, but I knit that first stitch again. Purl 2, knit 2, knit that one, both off together. Purl 2, knit 2 together, knit that first one again, both off together. Yeah, purl 2, whoops, purl 2, and my last one, let me get those. Knit 2 together, keep them on the needle, then knit that first stitch and both off together. I'll just purl and knit back so you can see what it looks like as I'm actually doing it. So this is just purl those 2. You're purling the pearls, knitting the knits, as you do with a traditional type of rib. There's variations of all of these, but these are just a few. There's many, many more rib techniques, but I just wanted to give you some options other than a standard type of ribbing, because you can use the ribbing for great effect. Make it part of the decorative part of the knitting as well as being functional, in that it has a job to do. There you go. I'll show you again on the finished sample. I've done this. This is 100% wool, this yarn, so it's got a really nice and natural spring anyway. But that would give you a certain amount of stretch. Really nice, easy mock cable. Right, now perhaps to the most advanced one, the 2 colour. I'm just going to take a sip of water. I'm sorry. Back in episode 6, I think it was, we talked about changing colour when we did Intarsia. Sorry, cameraman's getting cross with me. When we did Intarsia, when you change the blocks of colour, you need to twist the yarns around each other. Excuse me. And then in episode 7, I think it was, we talked about 2 colour knitting, where we're stranding across the back. So in this particular type of ribbing, we're stranding. I do need to twist the yarns at the start of my swatch here. Depends how you're starting and finishing. What I've done here, so that it looked nice and neat, I actually did a 2-stitch start off in the teal colour and finished it off with that. And because I'm doing that, I need to twist this first colour in when I change. But depending on your pattern or the stitch count that you got, you may not need to do that. You just may need to run it up the side for the next row. But I'll show you how to do that. And I'll show you how to do the stranding, because you're dealing with 2 colours of yarn and you're dealing with a stitch that the yarn goes forward and the yarn goes back. Now, I cast on with the main colour because I actually quite like that. There is a method that you can cast on with 2 colours, but let's not be overachievers at this point. We don't need to do that. There's enough going on with our 2 colours of yarn. So I actually quite like that solid colour edge, but if you don't, then that's time. We'll do that another day. It's a bit more complex, but it's doable. But let's not be overachievers today. So I'm going to show you how to do this one. What you will need to do for this is, although you're not, let me be more specific, you could have this as a wider bands. You could choose to have the purl as, more stitches. That could be 3 purl, 2 knit, 3 purl. I would suggest that you don't go bigger than 3. There are patterns where you can do like a 5 purl gap between the 2 rows, or 3. I would, if you're going to do it like that, I would do 5 and 3 for your knit stitches, 5 purl. The problem is with that's a long way for your yarn to float across, to carry your yarn. So you'd have to trap it in some way, and then you kind of, that's making it more difficult again. If you were going to do that, you'd have to use the Intarsia technique, where you're twisting the colours round on the reverse side. But think how many little spools or bobbins of yarn you're going to need across a band of rib. So I would avoid doing that. I would just strand the yarn across and keep the pearls no more than 3. So it would be a 2-3 type, or you could do that 3 as well. any more than 3 stitches that you're trying to strand your yarn across, and you're going to have to trap it in some way. The floats just get too unwieldy. Unless you're doing a hat, you're not going to get fingers caught in a hat. But let me show you how to do this. So one of the little tricks, rather than have lots of bobbins or big balls of yarns, one of the things that you can do is have little yarn butterflies. Admittedly, that doesn't look too much like a butterfly. These are my yarn butterflies. Let me show you how to wind those. You can wind your yarn onto these kind of knitting bobbins. I call them knitting fish because they look like fish to me. The problem is with that, when you need to, you've got to kind of literally tug that through. They dangle nicely and don't get kind of, don't unravel, but you've got to keep pulling them out each time. If you make a yarn butterfly, let me show you how to do that very quickly. If you make a yarn butterfly, all you do, get some yarn, hold that piece of yarn in your thumb. You don't want to lose that bit. Then wind figure of 8 round your fingers. I'm doing it round 4 fingers. You could do it round 2. I'm just doing it round 4 fingers to show you. Then when you've got enough yarn on your little butterfly, then you wiggle it, your fingers off. Wiggle it off your fingers there. Then you want to twist the piece of yarn that you have been working with, and not pull that, a little slip knot through. Let me get my scissors and cut that. Pull that through to knot it. Oh, it's sorry, it's got itself all unraveled, or caught up, I should say. Knot that like that, and then you can pull the yarn that you held with your thumb. You can just pull that out. It'll nicely pull out. Okay. So that's a yarn butterfly, and that's what I've done here. I don't need to give them a yank every time I want to change. Right, I just pull on my little butterflies. Right, to do this then, I again had the teal at the front and back end of my knitting. So I'm going to knit 2 with my teal colour. Now, the general rule of this is on the right side, before a purl stitch, you drop the old colour and you bring the working colour underneath the yarn. Because this is my starting stitch, I'm going to need to twist those, otherwise I'm going to get a hole. So I bring that forward. That's the only time I need to twist. Okay, so I've done 2 in purl. Now I've got to bring that back, and my teal yarn is going to come under. What do I mean by under? I mean, this is at the top. I'm bringing it under, and I'm going to knit my 2 knits. Now I've got to bring the gold yarn through again, because I need that for my purl. So I want that to go under my teal. And purl my 2 here. Drop that back. Keep that going under. Oops, sorry, that stays at the back because that's my knit stitch. I don't need to twist them because I'm carrying the yarn across only 2 or 3 stitches. I don't need to do any twisting. The fact that I'm working consistently with these 2 colours, there's no twisting needed. I'm not going to get a hole. Now I've got to bring my gold forward, but I want it under the teal. Now if you're thinking, oh my goodness, I can't cope with that, that's fine. Just get the rhythm of changing the colour for the knit and the purl, and then worry about that later. So that's going back. That stays up. This is under the teal. The reason you're trying to keep them under on this row is it just keeps the order of your knitting. It gives you a smoother transition. I've got to bring my gold forward now. You see why these yarn butterflies are better than great big balls of yarn. Imagine if I had to maneuver that each time. That's going back. And the very fact that this is over the top, that gold yarn is underneath. Okay, let me show you what to do on the purl row. So I'm starting off with my teal colour. I'm just purling. I find the pearl row a bit easier actually in terms of transition of colours. I do have to just twist this one because if I don't, I'm going to get a hole. It's just at the first, and that's because I started and ended with the main colour, but your pattern may be different. So now I'm going to have to knit, and the rule, the advice here is on the wrong side before a knit stitch, you're going to drop the old colour. I want to knit this, remember, so that goes at the back, and I bring my working colour over the top of the old colour. Okay, all right, so I've got to bring that back because I don't need it now. Now my teal on the purl side is going over the top, and when I say over the top, it's not over the top of the needle, it's over the top of the other colour. So this now has to go back because I'm doing a knit stitch that goes over the top of that, of the teal. Okay, got to bring that forward. So my teal now goes over the top of my working yarn. The working yarn is whatever you have in your hand at that point. I got to get this one over the top here. It's not as complicated really as it looks. You get into a rhythm of it. So if you just remember on the right side roll, you're going to drop the old colour and you'll bring the working colour under the old colour, whatever it happens to be. Oops. But if that's too much to cope with, and sometimes it is when you're starting out. Oh, I see Claire Jackson and Debbie Bouquet. Bouquet, if I'm saying that right, Bousquet? Thank you for joining us. I really appreciate that. So now we're going to, the mustard yarn, the gold yarn goes to the back because I need to do my knit stitches. Then it comes forward again because obviously as I'm knitting the rest, I don't want that in the way and it would mess up the stitch pattern. 2 more purl stitches. Okay. There you go. Just do another quick row. So on the knit row, on the right side row, I do need to twist there, but just on this first one, I need to bring it forward. I'm doing my pearls. Now this time, my working colour is going under the next colour. Okay, it's going under. It's not going over the needle or under the needle. This colour, this one's going over the top, this is going under. So if you can remember, on right side row, your working yarn goes under, and on the wrong side row, your working yarn goes over. But if that's just too much to worry about, then don't. The reason we do it is just it makes the knitting more even. I'll show you in a minute on the sample that I did. And you don't have to keep throwing them over the top. I'm just doing that so it's really clear what I'm doing. And I hope it's clear. You're probably thinking, oh, this is just too much. It's really not. I'd rather you've got the rhythm of your knit and pearls in 2 different colour right than worrying about where the yarn goes at this point. That comes later. You can't expect to do everything in one go. But if you can, that's fantastic. It's progress, not perfection, remember. There you go. So by keeping a certain rhythm, an order of where your yarn goes, let me just show you before we finish off. On the back side here, I changed part way through. See how that's clear that there's some sort of rhythm there, you know, over, under. But here I changed part way through to see if it made a difference. And I can't say that it really made a difference. Where's that middle point? Where's that row that I did that on? Yeah, I can't say it really made a difference, but I found it easier to knit by maintaining some kind of order, over, under, or under, and over. But just practice it. You'll soon find that you get into a rhythm. I'm going to ask the camera now to come back to me. I really hope you found that helpful. I know that last one is a bit tricky. It's, you know, it's quite a complicated technique, but practice it. It really gives a nice effect. If you've got two contrasting yarns, it's lovely. But just, again, do swatches, play about with it, see how you like it to be. So I hope you found that interesting. And if you've got any questions at all about this or anything else that we do at Knitter Matters, put it in the thread below. Anytime during the week, I'll be happy to answer your knitting questions. That's what it's there for. Don't forget also our friends at Mary Maxim offer a 20% discount on one item. If you choose to buy anything from marymaxim.com, it would be the highest priced item in your cart, but you must put in the promo code Cheryl to get that 20%. Do have a look at their website. There's some really fun things coming up for the holidays and Christmas and all sorts of goodies. So have a look round, and if you do want to buy anything, put in that promo code and you'll get 20% off. And they ship globally, so you don't have to worry where you are in the world. So also, don't forget that this episode of Knitter Matters and all others are uploaded to our page later on. It's also uploaded to our YouTube channel, so do subscribe to that if you haven't already done so. Like us on Facebook, share with other knitters, and we're on Instagram as well. We've got some really fun things coming up in the next few weeks that I'll be able to share with you soon, I hope. So in the meantime, don't hesitate to ask me any questions about knitting, either about today's episode or any others. I'll be happy to answer them. So stay well, stay safe, keep calm, and keep knitting, and I will see you next week. Bye for now, everyone.